has a monopoly on the truth. Our version of our own truths are based on our own lived experiences. In this space, we welcome different perspectives to learn, unlearn, and enlighten. Welcome to The Lantern. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Lantern Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Becky Davis, who is the founder of a Wellbeing company. Becky, welcome to The Lantern Podcast.
Hello, lovely to be here.
Becky, we met each other at a mental fitness event. As a point of departure, why were you at the event and why do you think mental fitness is important?
I am so pleased that I went to that event. It was an event hosted by Emmy Forst and Female Founders Rise. So I'm part of that community. And I'd seen it advertised. I'd never heard of Maya before who ran the event, but I thought that's going to be a good opportunity just to get myself into London, go and meet some different people. And it was one of the best events that I've ever been to. I think the energy in the room, what Maya did that day was it was mind blowing. It was really mind blowing to be able to have such an impact like she did.
Yeah, so have you always been, I would say, mindful of mental health, mental fitness? Did you know about mental fitness before attending the event? Like, take me through your own journey and your perspective on mental health.
Yeah, so definitely before the event, so probably over the last 4 or 5 years, most specifically. So I founded a wellbeing organisation, as you know now, but prior to that, I had a very corporate career. So I think when I was in the corporate world, not like I do now, not to the same extent that I do now. And I went through my own sort of personal journey to kind of get to where I am and really discover the importance of great mental well-being and also mental fitness.
Okay, so take us through maybe your formative years in corporate.
Yeah.
What were some of your foundation experiences, and maybe how that's interwoven into your journey now as a founder in the well-being space?
Yeah, sure. So my corporate experience was very much in the telco and the IT sector. So that's kind of where I grew up and honed my craft, if you like. Um, I was always in a sales environment, so monthly sort of KPIs, always measured on the outcomes, on your revenue targets. So very used to being in a, only as good as your last month environment, which
Hmm.
creates a lot of pressure, but as a recovering perfectionist, it seemed to work well for me because I liked to do really well at that. Um, but how I kind of got into well-being is a bit of a longer story, but let me share if you can sort of entertain me on this one.
Of
So
course.
and it's a little bit sad. So in 2005, my mum at the time went from being really well to really poorly, and 8 weeks later she passed away completely unexpectedly, completely out of the blue. So as a sort of young 29-year-old, full on corporate career, like just a week after her funeral, I went back to work because I had no idea how to deal with that grief or loss on that scale. Carried on in my corporate career, and then 5 years later, so another 5 years after that, I had to stop, have a routine operation, and it was probably the first time in 5 years that I had actually really stopped. And what happened in those few weeks of recovery was my grief hit. So the grief that
Wow.
probably should have landed 5 years earlier, that I'd held on to, hit. And then what happened though, because it's 5 years after the passing, like there's no one there to pick you up, there's no one there to help you, there's no one there to understand you. And a friend of mine in exasperation one day just sort of said, Becky, why don't you just go and see a counsellor? And I was like, corporate girl, career, and the idea of me going to see a counsellor could not have been more alien. It really. But in desperation, I agreed to go and speak to a counsellor. And I met her once a week for the next 3 months. And at the end of those sessions, I described her as the woman that changed everything without changing anything, because she had given me space to talk. She had given me permission to be okay with not being okay. And finally, just to be a little bit kind to myself. And I was always inspired by that, I don't know, that experience that I had with her. So that kind of like started to, sow a little seed. And then it was some
Mm.
5 years later, I decided I was a bit disillusioned with my corporate career. So I decided to retrain as a counsellor. And of course, I did that when my son was just 1 years old, and alongside my corporate career. So I did 3 years of study of
Yeah.
humanistic counselling based on transactional analysis, which is all about our development of personality from 0 to 7, how we transact and communicate in the adult world. And that's really when I started to understand well-being. That's really when I started to understand, what does it take to feel good and function well most days. So yes, I did 3 years of study, and then got to the end of that and thought, well, that was really hard because it was all about self-exploration. There's no way I want to be a counsellor. So, and had a really like lovely offer in the corporate world at that time. So took that, did that for another 2 years. But as always with these things, when you've made that decision, it's only a matter of time. So I left the corporate world, went on, did a postgrad in business and personal coaching, became a mental health first aider. And then so really kind of like crossed the T's and dotted the I's in terms of my training, study, research, qualifications. You know how it goes, all the thousands of words of essays.
Yeah.
And then thought, okay, how can I take this into the marketplace?
Yeah.
And that's kind of the beginning of my story, if you like.
Wow. It it is, it's quite the story. You can tell by my reaction. I'm so taken aback. There's a few points that I'd like to unpack. And the one I want to start with is around bereavement. And I
Mm.
apologize obviously for bringing it up, and I hope it's not like
Right,
opening a
no, please do.
wound.
It's important to have these conversations. So you ask away.
Okay, so I find it interesting that you said that you just took a week off,
Yeah,
because I think in one of the articles that we've actually written on the Lantern podcast, I think a while ago, we're discussing who decides how long the bereavement period should be, because obviously these things are underpinned by policy. So
yeah,
I'm curious as to what is your view in the length of time that you're given for bereavement?
yeah,
Is it effective, and who decided how long it should be?
yeah. Well, I think it's a great question. I definitely have a view on it. Um, and everybody that loses someone, the experience is different. So for me, as I said, mum had gone from being really well, literally in the space of a day, to in intensive care, to 8 weeks later passing away. And those 8 weeks was such a roller coaster of a ride. And then we lost her, the funeral was a week later. And all I craved at that stage was normality. It had been
Mm,
so traumatic. I just needed normality, which I think now, in hindsight, I, I shouldn't have gone back to work. But it's
yeah.
this thing is we can't tell people. But perhaps if my employer had said it's mandatory 4 weeks, because we know any bereavement of like a close, immediate family member like that it's going to hit hard, and there's going to
Mm,
need time and space for reflection. So even just knowing that grief is tricky.
mm,
But it's 20 years this year since I lost my mum. Like I can't even believe that as I say that out loud, because when I
mm,
think about her, like the pain of it is almost as equal as it was 20 years ago. It just occupies my mind less. So for
mm,
me, there's a space to ensure that someone grieves. But actually, if at that moment in time what they crave is normality, even if it's not right for them, who is the employer to say take 4 weeks? Because they might be thinking, all I need is my routine, and that's what keeps them safe at that moment in time. So
mm,
it, and then for me, like 5 years later, I couldn't, I'll never forget. I was stood at work when I phoned that counsellor, and I say, like, I'll never forget how it felt in my body, how the tears flowed, how the words didn't, I couldn't barely get my words out. But the counsellor, it wasn't the first time she'd experienced that type of call. So we got the first appointment booked in. But 5 years later, I couldn't have gone to my employer and said, I'm really grieving. I think I need some
Yeah.
time and some space now. So it's almost like how do we talk about grief? How do we label grief? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, but
Mm.
I definitely think there should be some time, some time given, at least as optional. Perhaps if my employer had said, no, 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 you take a month. We don't want to see you for a month. Maybe I would have taken that month and grieved at that time.
Yeah, it's such a it's a heavy topic, as you can tell. I'm still trying to digest what you're saying because I think I'm just imagining the circumstance, and it's just also the lack of emotional intelligence, I think, within the corporate space, right? Because you're balancing profits alongside real people, and
Yeah,
real people experience real things. So
yeah,
in that moment, yes, maybe you did need somebody to tell you that, but from their perspective, it's like, well, if this person's only taken a week and they're good to go after, who are we to, you know,
yeah,
encourage them to take more time off? But I
yeah.
also find it interesting that you experience the emotions well, let's say that they rose to the surface 5 years later, because I think that aligns with the work in the trauma space around like intergenerational trauma and how it compounds. And
Absolutely.
it aligns with my thoughts around compounding in mental health, because I think people perceive it as I have a crisis, an acute crisis at a certain point in time, and it's the catalyst is a specific moment or specific circumstance. But it's interesting in your story that it just highlights that's not the case. It's a buildup, it's an accumulation. But I wonder if I can dig deeper into what was the exact catalyst that made you break down at year
Yeah.
5.
So I had had this operation, and
Hmm.
I unfortunately have had quite a few operations. So I've experienced general anaesthetic, and this
Hmm.
is a bit more spiritual and how we hold it in our body. But I came round from that general anaesthetic, and I was just crying my eyes out, and all I wanted was my mum. Now this
Right.
happens to me every time I have a general anaesthetic. I pre-warn the recovery nurses. This is what's going to happen.
This is who
But
you are.
this is who I am. But in that moment, I think
Yeah.
as you're coming round from a GA, all the stuff all the scaffolding you build yourself like day in, day out has
Yeah.
gone. I'm at my most vulnerable. And I
Mm.
just, and then when I came round from that operation, that's what I experienced. I wanted my mum, and that feeling did not leave me for weeks and months. So I associate that with the grief of how I would expect a normal person to have responded when my mum first passed.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, it felt devastating. It felt devastating.
As you recollect that story, what also comes to mind is I think we can't solve intergenerational trauma in 6 counseling sessions, because I think most corporate organizations can only really afford 6 per employee,
Hmm.
right? But with the level of trauma that you experienced, the level of grief, to be more specific, do you think 6 sessions was enough to address that, or did you then have to seek help beyond the mandatory 6 sessions?
No, so I funded those sessions myself at the time.
Okay.
Interestingly, it wouldn't have crossed my mind to share that experience with the corporate that I was working for at the time. I was extremely private about it. But again, thinking it would have been 2010. So
Hmm.
again, we're in a different time now, aren't we? So I was extremely private about it. I wouldn't have considered going to my HR department, speaking to them about it. I managed it myself. I think what happened during the course of so I did it over 3 months. So I had about 12 sessions. And I think what 6 sessions or 12 sessions is enough to do is to bring some new self awareness and some new self awareness about what's going on for you, what change might be needed. So, although it might not be the right amount of time to make the change, I think just as people start to get an experience of what change is possible, how they can change how they feel is if that's possible. I think that that's enough time to do that. And also, I think depending on, well, I think if we're talking about intergenerational trauma, it's different. But I
Mm,
think even an hour sitting with a really skilled counselor or a coach,
mm,
some really good work can be done. I remember I vividly remember the first counselling session and coming away from that lady, and just even that, I just felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. Um,
mm.
yeah,
I, you raised another important topic around privacy because I think, the confidentiality elements in these EAPs is something that's often overlooked because that is something that people find as a barrier to accessing help.
yeah,
Because there's that, if you're a private person, the minute you go there, we know what the policies say, but the reality is people are going to know that something is up.
yeah, yeah,
So, how do you think we get better at managing that side of things where it comes to, I'm an employee, but I'm very private.
yeah,
The, there is help in place, but I don't think the veil is thick enough.
yeah.
How do you think we deal with
Yeah,
that?
and it's because the statistics support that as well. So 49% of people still in the workplace won't speak up about mental health. And I
Yeah,
understand that because
yeah,
I absolutely would not even, I last worked in corporate in 2019,
yeah,
and I wouldn't have spoken up. I would not, because there's just this fear that it's going to risk your personal brand, it's going to
yeah.
risk your career potential. You don't want to necessarily be known as that person. So 49% of people still don't speak up. So, and it's something that I've really considered as I created my wellbeing program. I think there's a couple of options. You need your internal people and you need your external people. But I think even still with external, there's a mistrust sometimes of like, well, actually, what is being reported back? But again,
Mm,
that's why, like, as a coach, so I'm accredited with the International Coach Federation, which means that I align with a code of conduct and an ethical framework. So I adhere to confidential clauses.
mm,
I state that in every coaching session, everything that you share is confidential and that's unless somebody feels at harm. I feel that they may be at harm to those themselves or those around them, but otherwise everything remains confidential. If it doesn't, I can lose my accreditation, which means I lose my career. So
mm,
we do have that in place in a completely unregulated industry for us coaches that choose to.
mm,
Sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a tangent. The main point I want to say, though, is that when developing my wellbeing program, I was like, how do we reach these people? How do we reach the people that will never come to a training session or a coaching session and really speak up? And
yeah,
part of my program that I created is completely self-study, and it's
mm,
personalized outcomes. It's given them the autonomy to choose their own well-being, but it means they can do it in the privacy of their own home. They're coming up with their own answers, and there's no need to report back into the business. So people can really keep that private element of what's coming up for them, but still do that personal development piece where they're learning about themselves, when they're understanding themselves just a little bit better to enable themselves to make the change for better mental health and for better well-being as well.
I love the fact that you've developed your program to be more self-paced and self-study. However, how do we ensure that at some point in somebody's journey they even consider self-study? Because just, and I'm only just paralleling your story because obviously you shared it, right? You were not self-aware, let's say, for 5 years that you're still dealing with grief. You didn't do self-study or any introspection.
Mm,
For somebody else, that might be 15 years, 20 years. They
mm.
may never access a program because they may feel like, I don't need to, I'm okay. Meantime, they're not okay. So how do you think we sort of bring this to people earlier, or encourage that, everybody needs to go on some sort of personal development journey? Because I know some people feel like they don't need it because they're perfect.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not going to work for everybody. You absolutely have to be in the right mindset to want to help yourself. But I think what I'm seeing as a trend in organizations that are really making a difference when it comes to well-being is they've got their well-being allies and their champions in place.
Hmm.
the program, the self-study program that I've created, can also be taken with group coaching. So it doesn't have to be in the privacy of your own home.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening is the wellbeing allies and the champions go through the program, and because it's so personalised, and people are learning about themselves and learning what they need as an individual. So it's not a training where we go, look, you do X, Y, and Z, and then you're going to feel like so and so. This is like, here's some really nice theories, some really nice information. Now have a look at this from a coaching led approach, come up with your own answers. So people feel the difference. And when
Mm.
people feel the difference, they talk about it. So it's a cultural thing as well within an organization. Now, allies and champions, I'm really aware, are getting some really good training, but they're getting sort of very practical training on resilience, on the curve cycle, on all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But what happens is, when you can really relate it to yourself, you start to tell stories. And we all know we love, our brains interact so much better with a story. We believe a story, want to buy into the story. So it's then those wellbeing allies and champions who can then just go and tell their stories. And someone doesn't even have to come and ask, they just listen, feel seen, or see themselves in that story, and then go off and do the work. I mean, it would be utopia to go, everybody do this and learn about yourself, and off you go. Sadly, it's not how it works.
I wonder, Becky, what are your thoughts around maybe replacing, and I know I'm, using a big word by saying replacing the EAP with more coaching style programs? Because to my mind, right, if EAPs are so underutilized because of confidentiality, people not being confident, people not realizing they may have a problem, should we not be iterating those programs and moving away from that sort of style of help and moving more towards coaching style help? Would that not be helpful for everybody?
Yes, I think it would be so helpful. And actually, I was only at a wellbeing event earlier this year where I was listening to a panel discussion exactly about this, because the go-to investment has been always an EAP. But a personal friend of mine who works in HR, her story to me is like, well, what else am I supposed to buy? And that's literally it. She's like, I don't want it. It doesn't get any user adoption, but
Yeah.
it is go to. So it's about shifting that narrative. But it's that bigger piece for me as well. So if you're investing in an EAP, but you've got low user adoption, which means you've got low impact, you've got, you're not making a difference to your people. It's time to make a change, to put in place something that really impacts people, makes a difference, because we're living in a really hard time, cost of living crisis. There's a lot of pressure on people. And I actually think that this broadens out into corporate social responsibility,
Yeah.
in terms of how are you looking after your people, so that
Mm.
when your employee leaves and they go and have a chat with the person on the checkout at Tesco's, how are they interacting? Are they making that person's day, or are they being rude to that person? Because
Yeah.
got the ability,
Yeah.
so for me, that's a little bit of, can we tie that into the CSR?
Yeah.
But more seriously, like the health and safety exec are now making organizations accountable for employee stress. So
Yeah.
actually, how are you preventing it? How are you stopping it from helping? Now, I think one model that has worked really well is the mental health first aid framework. But
Mhm.
that's really good on a reactive
Yeah.
scale, right? And for me, it's just layering cost on an already broken mental health system. So
Mm.
instead of layering that cost at the wrong end, let's layer the cost up here. Let's give people the skills and the tools and the self awareness and the personal development to know themselves well enough. So that person still carries the responsibility. Okay, it's still their responsibility to look after themselves, just like you'd go and work your body out. Let's go and work your brain out. It's skill development. It's about learning the skills to have great well-being. So for me, the organization must provide the provision to do that, but ultimately with the responsibility back on the individual to do the work on themselves.
I love everything that you've said. And, I personally don't know what is the apprehension from an HR perspective. I remember when I first told my aunt who worked in HR, she worked for like big international organizations. And I was telling her the idea of Seize the Light, which is obviously, more independent mental health care. And she said to me, you're going to need a very special HR person to understand your offering. And I
Mm.
didn't see it. I was like, what do you mean? Like, to me, it's pretty straightforward. Like, if your EAP is so underutilized and
Mm.
it's, I don't even know if you are aware of the history of the EAP, because I actually researched it in preparing for
Oh,
this
tell me.
podcast. It's
Yeah,
like,
tell me more.
so the EAP was actually created by the American Association, the medical board, at a time where alcoholism was rampant, and that was the way that they were helping people deal with alcoholism.
Mm.
But we must also take into account that at that time the workforce was very male dominated,
Mm.
and the type of labor people were doing was physical labor. So if you
Yes.
look at all of those historics, that's why there was such an emphasis on physical health, and even from a risk perspective, you had workman's comp. So it all sort of tied together that your physical was important, but then people were drinking a lot. So let's have this program and this helpline where you can call and get help. We're no longer in that time. Not only is we're not doing physical labor anymore, there's other people that are not men in the workforce now, and we're in a cognitive labor market, and that's why the mind is becoming so important. But the programs haven't iterated to reflect that.
No, no, absolutely. And we could diverse and go on about the education system and how that hasn't caught up either, but we won't. But it's like the working week, the 9 to 5, like the Monday to Friday. Like that doesn't really work for us anymore. I worked for in my one of my corporate roles. Our company strapline: work is something you do, not somewhere you go. And this was way before COVID, because our work, we didn't have to go and sit at a desk. We could do our work anywhere.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't know that about the EAP history, and that is so interesting. But it's such a different skill set now that we need to share with our people. And absolutely, the hybrid working, the agile working, we've got all these new issues coming in: the anxiety, the poor mental health, the loneliness, and then we've got tech, which we think is,
Yeah.
for us,
There's that.
does do so much good, but it's so addictive in a really bad way, because it keeps us back from what's really important. This is what I share in my program. Like, get this back to basics. Well-being
Yeah.
does not need to be complicated. Actually, it's really simple. It's your values. Get 6 values. Know what's important to you, and then make decisions and live a life with those values. Because that's what's important to you. If you're living a life aligned with them, you're always going to be able to feel good, function well. And then, what are your strengths? Like, figure out what your strengths are, and then really play to your strengths. Choose, and again, decisions, make choices based on what your strengths are. Because when you're doing something that you're great at, guess what? Again, you feel good, you've got the ability to function well. And then our innate human needs. So this is something that's missed so much. It comes from the human givens theory, and it's that humans are born with 12 innate needs, and we
Oh,
have resources in order to get these needs met.
yeah.
And the research goes as far to say that when these needs aren't met, that's when we suffer with depression, that's when we suffer with low mood. But these are needs that we might not think about. So we all know, like, movement and food and sleep. But then, in addition to that, we've got community, emotional connection, respect, all these different ones, meaning and purpose. But understanding these are my needs as a human being. And when I feel off, I look at those 12 needs and I'm like, okay, this one's not being met. That's where my focus is going to go. But
Yeah.
not many people actually know this. It's not, this is what should be being shared. This is what takes the difference from somebody not feeling so great and staying stuck and staying there, to not feeling so great, but having the skills and the tools to actually do something about it.
I mean, I love everything you've said, and thank you for educating about the 12 needs. I'm going to look into that myself as well. This is a new concept that I haven't come across. But I wonder what your perspective is on maybe some people's view, and work isn't a place for us to go and feel good. And like we should feel good, like, you know, we should feel good in other spaces. And it's not, they don't owe us friends because they pay us a salary. So what's your view on maybe that kind of mentality?
Like business is people, and if your people aren't well, there is no business. So we, as business owners, as large corporates, you have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to your people, but it also doesn't make sense if you don't look after your people, because then your people aren't performing, but you're still paying them an annual salary. Like, it just doesn't. it just doesn't make sense. So for me, it just doesn't make sense. And I think for some organizations and some leaders, they really get it. But I
I
just
think
don't.
when you say some, you're being quite generous.
Yeah, a handful.
Yeah.
And then we have a handful of, and then I get people that say to me, oh no, like my organization really looks after me. Like we've got access to this, we get our birthday day off, we get this, we get this, which is great, right? But that for me is that's benefits of working for that organization. I think with well-being, what organizations are missing is you've got a chance now to stop your people burning out. You've got a chance
Yeah.
now to stop your people becoming ill or stop them from suffering from poor mental well-being by giving them the tools and training them in the skill of having great mental health, because it is a skill. You can,
Yeah.
you'll have people that are naturally really positive and upbeat. You'll have people, sadly, that naturally suffer from low mood, but everybody with that extra knowledge can help themselves. It and really easy. Like I say, it's really simple. Sometimes the stuff that in my program, I'm just like, this is so simple. It's just, but it's simple because I've lived, breathed,
Yeah.
it. And actually, part of my story is from all my counselling training, so my transactional analysis, and then also my postgrad, to studying for my postgrad in business and personal coaching. I then, in 2022 and 2023, I had a really tricky couple of years,
Mm.
and everybody kept saying to me, and when I say tricky, I always say, like, what are the 5 most stressful things? So, divorce, death of a loved one, moving house, major injury or illness, and there's one other. Anyway, I experienced all 5 of them,
Yeah.
and but everyone kept saying to me, Beck, what? How are you okay? Like, why? How are you doing? Okay? And I think at the time I wasn't too sure, but then it's become so innate to me that even, like, so some of my values, like fun, adventure, like I brought adventure into my week, into my month. And that didn't mean like a big adventure traveling off to Japan or Australia. Just
Mm.
maybe meant adventure like visiting a different town or cooking a different meal, like stuff that filled my soul.
Mm.
And I knew that community was important. I knew, I've got a very best friend that's been around for 30 years. Like, she kept me sane during that time. So I actually know during those 2 years what kept me well. And it's the essence of the program that I have developed as well. And it's not just me, my clients have told me this as well. So it came out of part of a coaching program that I created. And my
Mm.
clients kept feeding back to me like, oh, that was brilliant. That was brilliant. So these self-guided exercises. So that's what's gone in to this program. I know that it works. It's worked for me and it's worked for my clients. So yeah, it's a watch out world. Here I come.
Here you come. And I wonder if you could maybe serenade just a few tools that people should have in their toolkit. Because I mean, I think for me, it's okay for us to discuss the problems at an academic level, corporate institutions, society. But I'm always an advocate of, if you want to change the world, you change yourself first. So,
Yes.
what are some of the tools that just anyone listening to this should have in their toolkit as a bare minimum?
Yeah, so I'm quite a big fan of positive psychology, not to be mistaken with positive Pollyanna or toxic positivity. There's science behind positive psychology in terms of how it fires up our neural pathways and the
Mm.
neuroscience, what we understand about the brain. So
Mhm.
those few years, every day, I wrote down 5 things that I was grateful for. So we know gratitude,
Mm.
and again, it teaches our brain to look for what's good, even when you can't imagine that you could find any good in a day.
Mm.
Um, and now I look back at those notebooks, and it really it touches my heart actually, because
No.
they're lovely memories, and it
Yeah.
might have just been did a bike ride and the sun was out with my son. It might be, oh, somebody dropped me in a bunch of flowers, or even simpler than that, like the nice lady at the checkout in Tesco's. We had a nice chat.
Mm.
I was finding things every day to be grateful for. So for me, it's gratitude, kindness, actually, the science that sits behind kindness as well. So even if you're having the hardest time, can you find space to be kind in your day, even if it's just complimenting somebody or whatever that might be? and values. I always come back down to values. Like, if you can go through the process of figuring out, and it's not an easy process, it's not as just easy as going, oh well, it's my family, my work, and I like to bike ride, and that's what's important to me. It's really digging deeper into really understanding those 6 things that are important to you, and then no one can take that away from you.
Hmm.
So bad things can happen. No one can take it away from you, but also, so values, gratitude, but the stories that we choose to tell ourselves. So,
Yeah.
and again, in coaching, this is, my role as coach is never to get caught up in my client's story. Like, I'm doing them a real misservice if I do that. So it's this, whether something is good or bad. So have you heard the parable about the farmer and his horse? Shall I tell you it?
No, please tell me.
So this is my, and this is how I lived. Like, for those 2 years, I had to live in this way. So there's a farmer and he has a horse, and the horse runs off, and the neighbors come over and they say, oh, that's such terrible luck. And the farmer says, good or bad, hard to say. The next day, the horse returns and brings with it 7 wild horses, and the neighbors come over and they go, wow, that's amazing, good luck. And the farmer says,
Hmm.
good or bad, hard to say. A few days
Hmm.
later, the farmer's son rides one of the wild horses, falls off, breaks his leg, and the neighbours come over and go, oh, that's such bad luck. And the farmer says, good or bad, hard to say. And then
Hmm.
a few weeks pass by, and the army come knocking at the doors, taking people on board to the army, and they see the farmer's son, and they pass him by, and the neighbours come over and say, oh, that's such brilliant luck. And the farmer says, good or bad, hard to say. And what I take from that story is, how do we know if something is good or bad? And it's only as good or bad as the stories that we tell ourselves. And that's how when another terrible thing happened in those couple of years, I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh, really? But it was really just you hear me say it all the time, holding the reins loosely. How do we know where this is leading? How do we know the purpose of this? And we are just the stories that we choose to tell ourselves.
I love that. And I love that you always choose to see things from a certain perspective. As you say, we can't say whether it's a positive or negative perspective. It is just one perspective that you decide, and one vantage point that you decide that that's where I'm going to see this from.
Yeah.
But I wonder, when it comes to people learning about these concepts that we've spoken about today, when do you think is the best time for self discovery? And let's just say, like, from birth, when do you think in one's life is the best time to go on this journey of self discovery?
It's really interesting because I look at my program and I have thought about, does this work in education? Would this work in teenage years? I believe there has to be some life experience. I think there has to be some human experience to really see the value in understanding values, strengths, innate needs, but also, and it's an open question for me, because I'm still there thinking, but no, actually, if I had learned about my values and what was important to me, if I had learned that perhaps in time they may change, so they were relative for that moment in time, and
Hmm.
I had that as something to lean back on, how might that have changed my decisions and my choices that I had made? And looking back now, I can see so clearly. Like, at 19, I decided to go and live in the States, and left my really, like, brilliant, what is the equivalent of apprenticeship now. I was doing my degree and working, and I was like, no, I've got an opportunity to live in the States. So, that fun adventure for me is innate. It's so
Yeah.
clear that, looking back, um, and then times in my life when that hasn't been possible, COVID, we couldn't travel, we couldn't, and so now,
Hmm.
I think for anybody, it's just now, like, learning about yourself it's such an interesting topic. And I think as we get older, sometimes we forget who we are. And maybe if it had been instilled a little bit when we were younger, we wouldn't quite forget quite so much who we are, and you know the magnificence of every individual and what they bring to the table.
Yeah. I love that. And I didn't actually know that you moved to the US at 19.
Yeah.
I would love to know a bit more about that, and whether you think that's what impact that had on you from a personal development perspective. Because I think people who've moved overseas younger in life, you definitely go through it. I myself
Yeah.
also moved overseas young, so I know that it does definitely build a lot of resilience, and but at the same time, it definitely is a great character building experience.
Oh, it's so great character building. And I met this best buddy that I talk about, Lucy, like we met in the States. And even after we moved home, like we still speak every single day. So my experience of going out to the States, I've never even traveled to the States before. I just had this fascination of living out there. At the time you could go out and nanny, which was like, so I went out on a nanny scheme to work within the family, which is great because you really get to feel the culture. You're part of the family culture out there. Um, I didn't. I was always a bit rebellious. I'm one of four children. I'm the third child. You know, classic. Like I'm not the oldest. I'm not the youngest. You know, I didn't get enough attention. What can I do to be heard? Well, let's just rebel and go and live in a different country. Maybe mom and dad will notice then. You know. But interestingly, what I did do, so I lived in Atlanta in Georgia for a year, and I'd built my community. But at the end of that 12
Yeah,
months, I really wanted to go and travel to California and do a month out in California. And none of my buddies from Atlanta were keen to do that. So actually, I went and did that on my own. And that for me was like one of the bravest things that I think that I've done. Because remember, this is mid 90s, right? This is pre
yeah.
mobile phones, this is pre internet. So it's very different. You've got nobody tracking you where you are, or but yeah, that was like the adventure of a lifetime going to California for a month.
But are you glad that you did what you did when you did it?
Oh, yes, 100%. Yeah. And like last year, so I'm a single parent now to my 11-year-old son, and him and I go on holiday together, just the two of us, and I love it. And some people go, "Are
Yeah,
you okay going on your own?" And I'm like, well, I'm not on my own because me and my son are together, but yeah, absolutely. Like I'm showing him the world.
yeah,
And last year we went to Costa Rica for 3 weeks and I planned it all independently, booked the flights and the hotels and the car hire and all our trips. And, you know, there's a big world out there to be explored. But this is what's important to me. And
yeah.
to other people, it will be like, home comforts. I get my family round every Sunday for a Sunday roast and I want the security of a 9 to 5 job. And I take, but this is the values that you see. This is why everybody's different. Some people might hear me say that, going, "Oh, doesn't that sounds awful?" But
Hmm.
you can see how I kind of light up when I talk about it because it's what's important to me.
I mean, I can definitely see you lighting up, and I hadn't anticipated that we would go there, and I didn't even know that was part of your life journey. But now that I know that, it gives me more context into who you are and why you perceive certain things in a certain way.
Mm,
So I love that. But I think that when it comes to comfort and safety, and people have not wanting to step outside of a comfort zone, that I think is down to, yes, individual subjective choice, but there is also an element of the fear of the unknown.
hmm
And I think coming back to our conversation around corporate well-being, it's the same fear of, if we didn't have the EAP and we had nothing, then
Yeah.
what? But it's like, you can't have the fear of the unknown of having nothing, because of what's currently there is not working, but you're keeping it there because it's comfortable.
hmm
That's just a
Yeah.
comfort zone that it requires iteration, or it's got to go in its entirety. But we cannot be scared of the unknown and then not change anything and just keep doing what's not working.
No, and I absolutely agree. And I worked with one organisation where we ran some focus groups, and so we created the questions that we asked, and it was just so fascinating, like what comes back and what actually came up. And I feel people were quite truthful with that, with us externally running that. But people just really want community. They want to feel seen. They want to feel heard, and they want some help.
Yeah.
People want some help, and we all. I know that I'm here like laughing and joking, like don't. There's been plenty of tears on my pillow, really hard time, that's for sure. We all feel it, don't we? We
Yeah.
all feel how hard life can be, and I'm just thinking if organisations can invest in their people in wellbeing programs that turn the dial, that really make a difference, that make noise, that people are talking about. You rarely hear people go, "Oh, my EAP program." The difference it made for me. And my program, this is not to blow my own trumpet, but when the group coaching has come to an end, people are like, we don't want it to end. This has
Yeah.
been life changing. because they're learning about them. Just because they're learning about themselves, they're dedicating time to understand themselves better. And when you understand yourself better, you can make better choices for a better future.
Honestly, I love everything you've said. I love your life journey. I love your outlook on life and your perspective. I think it makes sense to me why I was drawn to you at the event.
Yeah,
Because I think it's just kindred spirits. You
yeah,
always find your people somewhere, somehow.
yeah,
Becky, we are coming to the end of the episode. I think we've had a great conversation around the well-being generally, because I think it's not just confined to corporate institutions. And I love the fact that you also recognize that corporates have a bigger social responsibility because these employees are real people out in the
yeah,
world. It's how they
yeah,
treat the people at Tesco and
exactly.
all the other people around them and their families. So it's not just good enough saying, oh, it's not our problem, it's everybody's problem.
It is.
So I wonder if there's anything that you would like to leave with the audience. You can take any perspective because I mean, I think you've got such a wealth of knowledge and experience. I don't even know where you would want to focus. So I'll just hand it over to you, and you have a few last words before we close out.
Yeah, well, let's believe that people have listened right to the end here, yeah. And if they have, I like through my counselling training, I learn unconditional positive regard. So whoever sits in front of you, I hold that unconditional positive regard. And I think my leaving message is to remember that for every person that you interact with, because you don't know what's coming behind them, like what they're carrying, but also that everybody is absolutely made for more. You know, you're made for more than where you currently are. There's more to you, there's more to be discovered, there's more to be remembered. And if there's any one area that you invest in your mental health, in your personal development, and in your well-being.
She's too good. That's what I get.
That's it. That's it. If I had a mic, I'd drop it, but I don't think it's worthy of that.
She's too good. Honestly, I think that you are so right. And I think people underestimate that in any investment you make, investing in yourself is the best investment. Yet
Yeah.
people don't see it that way. They overlook themselves and they invest in everything else and then wonder, why things don't look a certain way. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm definitely also a huge advocate for personal investment.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we should end it on that note. I like the drop the drop the mic.
Thank you so much
I
for
will.
having me.
You're welcome. I will drop Becky's details in the description box, and for those that would like to work with her, um, I would definitely want to get a hold of her self-paced program to get to know myself better. It will be in the description box. To anyone who's still listening, thank you for listening to the Lantern Podcast, and we will see you on the next episode. No one has a monopoly on the truth. Our version of our own truths are based on our own lived experiences. In this space, we welcome different perspectives to learn, unlearn, and enlighten. Welcome to The Lantern.